Let's talk about the Spanish women's national team, their federation, and Luis Rubiales. Well, this is definitely not the episode that I had in mind as my first episode following the World Cup, but unfortunately, we find ourselves in a situation that's too common and too familiar in the women's game. Over the last month, the Spanish women's national team made it into their first ever semi-final at a major competition. They went on to make it into their first ever final at World Cup, and to continue that glory, they got their hands on their first ever Women's World Cup trophy. Now, unfortunately, that's not exactly what we have been able to enjoy, and that's not exactly the headlines that we've been able to read, and that's not exactly what the media has been able to write on and be able to push and kind of enjoy. The players who just achieved history, the goal scorer in the final of Olga Carmona, the fans, the audience, everybody surrounding that has been stripped and robbed away from cherishing that joy. Luis Rubiales, who is currently on suspension, so I will not be referring to him as the president of the Spanish Federation because there is an interim individual in his position. So for now, Rubiales will be referred to as a former president of the Spanish Federation. During Sunday's awards ceremony, Rubiales was uncomfortably very touchy with the Lionesses and the Spanish players. He also had his hands all over Jenny Hermoso and in fact gave her a kiss on the lips that was not a consensual kiss. He was also seen celebrating in the stands and holding onto his crotch as he sat right beside Spanish royalty. Plenty of their players were sharing that enjoyment of winning the Women's World Cup on an Instagram live following the World Cup final. And it was shown in the locker room, Rubiales coming in and saying to one of the players that he wants to marry them. He also said to Jenny Hermoso that he wants to take her on a holiday to Ibiza. We saw a little bit more footage of the players outside where Rubiales was also giving a kiss to Olga Carmona. He was carrying her around in a very inappropriate manner. And on those same Instagram lives, Jenny Hermoso also said and recalled that she did not enjoy that kiss, but what else was she supposed to do? And what was supposed to be the next few hours and even week of joy for the players, for the fans, for everybody who had just tuned in for what had been such a historic World Cup to actually finally enjoy this trophy was all of a sudden overtaken by this very dark cloud that still is on top of us as I speak today. Why does this consistently happen in the women's game? And why is this situation specifically exploding or has exploded to the extent and the degree that it has? Why is it always the Spanish Federation and the Spanish players that consistently have to go through this? This is not the first time that they've had to voice concerns, specifically concerns around assault and sexual assault in camp after a World Cup. But why are these conversations still persisting in the women's game to this day, to this level, to this degree? That is the discussion we're going to have today. But in order to understand, I will do a very quick and brief chronological recall of events. So all of those events happened on Sunday. On Monday, the RFEF releases a statement on the behalf of Jenny Hermoso, which now we know is false, and Hermoso didn't actually say any of those words, but the words went along the lines of, I actually consented to this kiss and I enjoyed it, and it was actually just the heat of the moment, and it was a moment of celebration and joy. Now we know that is false. Not sure how the RFEF was able to release that and kind of very happily think that they will not be called out on it, but they released it, and a few hours later, Rubiales came out with a video that we also now know he was begging Jenny Hermoso and a few others to join him in the video. But if you are able to watch the video, which I don't recommend you do, it was just him talking about the events that happened, and basically him saying that, again, this was the heat of the moment, the joy of the moment, and there was basically nothing inappropriate or wrong that he did. 2 days later, on Wednesday, there was calls for Rubiales to be sanctioned. You had politicians come out and speak about this, Spanish politicians. You had the sports ministry in Spain also voice their opinions on this. You had head coaches in Spain and clubs release statements around this. You had FIFA Pro also release their own statement urging action because this was a deeply concerning and an inappropriate conduct of an individual. A day after that, on Thursday, so that was about 4 or 5 days since the Sunday events, FIFA finally comes out and opens a disciplinary proceeding against Rubiales. Again, until today, the beloved FIFA president Gianni Infantino is yet to speak on this, but on Thursday they opened a proceeding or a disciplinary proceeding against Rubiales, and also the RFEF announced that they were going to have an emergency assembly on Friday, so the following day. What we did see was an assembly and a speech that will unfortunately be studied and will be looked at for years to come in the women's game. That transcript, transcript, if you want to look at, feel free to look at it, but it is very much disturbing, the level of lying, arrogance, gaslighting, playing the victim card, and most importantly, abuse of power in every single statement and sentence that came out of Rubiales' mouth. You've probably seen the clips of Rubiales saying that he's not going to sign, no, I'm not going to resign, no, I'm not going to resign, in a very animated and aggressive fashion. He talked about how he's been prosecuted, he talked about how the media idiots are after him, and he said that this is enough, I've endured enough, I've done nothing wrong, go figure, I'm not going to resign, this is my position and this is where I'm staying. Worse, that speech was followed by claps from the room. There was an ovation from the room to somebody who had just abused his power, gaslit players. He called a sexual assault against Jenny Hermoso a consensual peck. He downplayed the situation, he gaslighted Jenny Hermoso, and most importantly said that he is actually the victim of the situation. And those players are after him. And he's done nothing wrong because he was just celebrating his players because he was just so happy and proud of them. I mean, could you imagine how we had seen all those pictures and all those images, and Rubiales with all that confidence came out and said that, and we'll exactly discuss why that is happening and why that kind of was expected to happen. A few hours after that, the sports ministry in Spain suspended Rubiales from his duties. 81 players from the current winning squad, so every single player from the current winning squad joined with a few other former players and those that were even at the 2015 World Cup. In total, 81 players that said they're not going to respond to an international camp call out until there's a change in leadership. On top of all this, the technical staff of the senior squad, including a few technical staff from the youth groups, have also resigned from their position. So when it comes to the coaching staff for the Spanish women's national team, it is only Vilda that's currently in his position. Hermoso also then releases her statement saying that I did not consent to this kiss. It was not a peck. I felt like my boundaries were crossed, and in fact, I felt disrespected, and I felt like I was a victim in that situation. Over 100 players came out in support of Hermoso. You're talking federation, other federations, the German Federation, the English Federation, various clubs in Spain. Barcelona came out with their own statements. You had pretty much every single Barcelona player and teammate of Hermoso come out and talk. Beth Mead, you're talking about, Ada Hagerberg, Janine Becky. Every single individual in the community came out in support of Hermoso. And I think we've seen a lot of battles and we've seen a lot of problems with federations where the women's game has stood up for each other, but nothing in this fashion. And again, we will discuss why this is such a unique and powerful thing in the women's game that no other sport is able to even remotely match. The events on Friday were not done, however, because the RFEF said, you know what, we're getting so much backlash, and instead of us taking accountability, we're actually going to sue Hermoso for accusing us falsely and saying that that kiss was not consented to. And so all of a sudden the RFEF want to now sue Hermoso. Saturday rolls around, FIFA respond by suspending Rubiales for an initial period of 90 days, and again in the most RFEF fashion they respond with another ludicrous statement that they now have taken off their website. Up to this stage, FIFA President Gianni Infantino is yet to make a comment on this. UEFA, a very important body in this conversation, it's key to note that Rubiales is actually a vice president on UEFA's board, and they're also yet to release a statement or suspend him from his current tasks until there's an investigation launched and hopefully a life ban comes out of this, because that is the only right decision to make. A suspension is not the decision. A suspension should be a step closer to the final decision, which there's only one right decision. It's funny because when a lot of these investigations come, it's like, right, is he going to get a removal? Is he going to get sacked, fired? What's the situation here? This time though, in this current discussion, there's only one right decision, and that is a life ban for women's sports, point blank. There is no way on earth you can say there's not enough evidence. Everybody has seen them. The footage is out there. It was broadcasted in front of millions, and in fact FIFA president was right there standing right beside Rubiales when all of this happened, especially when he was in the stands holding his crotch and celebrating. There is no hiding behind the fact. Everybody has seen it. And the way that Rubiales has used his power to use the RFEF as his own PR machine, because some of these statements that have come out, and I mean, clearly they've been so absurd and ludicrous that they've had to take it down from the website. It is unimaginable to say there is not sufficient or enough evidence that we're not too sure if we can life ban this guy, because that is the only my brain cannot fathom another solution or another conclusion that this can get to. It's a life ban or nothing. It's just a life ban, actually. The current situation that we find ourselves in is one that has almost been bottled up in the women's game. It's kind of, you've got a case on top of a case that's being dismissed, players' concerns being invalidated, to more players being invalidated, and all of that kind of like bottling in a little bottle. And this was the tip that exploded everything in it. And it is so incredibly sad and frustrating to think that it took a Spanish women's national team to win a World Cup trophy for this to come to light, and for us to finally have conversations that we've been dreading and asking to have for so many years. This is the result of federation after federation, organization after another organization, boards, individuals, officials, all of them consistently and continuously failing women in the sport. Individuals who get to those powerful positions only care about votes and money. And in fact, that's exactly what speaks in the Spanish Federation. Rubiales got to that position because of bought votes. He and Vilda and Vilda's father and the few of their boys' club. And with these bought votes, there's bought loyalty. If you recall back with the 15 players who voiced their concerns around the leadership, and specifically Vilda, Rubiales was one of the first to come out and defend Vilda in such passion and such loyalty. It's those votes that have gone Rubiales in his position to become the president of the RFEF. And in return, it's that money and that loyalty that has kept Vilda in his position for as long as it has been. That's exactly it. It's an abuse of power structure that is in so many football federations, but specifically that Spanish Federation. How could a man of such power, of such position, do such thing in a very public manner in front of millions, and then go up in a press conference in an assembly that he also knows has plenty of eyes and say the words that he did? And honestly, it's quite simple. A man who lied once and got away with it will think he can get away with it a second and a third and a fourth time. And that same man who got to the position that he did through gaslighting employees will also think he can keep that position by continuing to gaslight employees and players under him. He is just that. He has gotten away with it over and over and over again. He has seen that support and that loyalty from the boys' club under him stay there. And he knows if he doesn't get voted out, obviously, it will take a massive assembly in FIFA and UEFA to get involved to remove him. If he doesn't step down and if he doesn't resign, it will take votes to get him out, which he knows is a very expensive thing to do, and he knows it's a very long process. And so, yeah, he will continue to lie because he's done it before and he's gone away with it. And yeah, absolutely, he will continue to avoid taking guilt, and he will continue to downplay the situation, continue to play the victim card, continue to gaslight every single player that's spoken against him, specifically Jenny Hermoso, who I absolutely feel terrible for, because this is what she's been having to deal with after winning her world. Like, you've just won a World Cup and this is what you have to deal with. I cannot even imagine how that might feel. And not only has he done it and gone away with it, he's seen so many of his colleagues also do it and get away with it. So of course, it's like, if you're stealing candy from the little cabinet in the kitchen and your mom doesn't see you over and over again, and your brothers are doing the same thing and also they don't get caught, then what's stopping you from continuing to do the same thing? You continuously get away with it. There's no consequences. If anything, that's more money in your pocket. That's more candy that you're stashing up in your room. It's exactly that. Federations and organizations maybe still don't quite understand the consequences and the damage those bans had. And when those bans were unlifted, who was unlifting these bans? What were the power structures that were put, and who was leading those voices? Who was up there saying, okay, I've just removed a ban, you're allowed to play, but you're not allowed to play here. This is how much you get paid. Who are making these decisions? Those are the people who kind of gave the sport not a head start, but allowed the opportunities to happen. It's the same individuals who have been at that top point. It's more money in their pockets regardless of what's happening. They continue to abuse their power. But one thing that we must remember, and specifically in this situation, that one can only abuse power for so long. When we take a closer look at the 15 players that stepped down in October and voiced their own concerns at the forefront of the argument, the number one priority was the toxic environment. And they had voiced assault situation that's happened with Vilda and from the leadership of that federation. That was the main concern afterwards, was right, the lack of communication, the analysis problems, the not believing what was going to happen on the pitch. All of that tactical stuff was second. But number one was always and has always been the environment and the toxic atmosphere that has been in the locker room under Vilda for the past 7 years. And like I mentioned, knows he can get away with lying. And he knows it doesn't matter because that money's still going to be flowing into his pocket. Because he knows he's got these boys that clapped for him, backing him up. And those votes are still going to him. But it also shows how little self-reflection and understanding he has and sensitivity even to topics around sexualization, topics around sexism and power relation in sports. Like, that is probably the number 101 course of when you start taking anything about sports. It's those power relations, specifically in women's sports. But this is a man that's clueless. I mean, this is a man that is absolutely clueless about these sensitive topics that a federation must be extremely aware of. How the media and the fans and every single person who's spoken out right now has been gaslighted by Rubiales is exactly how those 15 players felt. They talked about their concerns not being heard. And I mean, if this is how frustrated we feel, can you just imagine how the players feel of having to have fought this fight multiple times and voiced their concerns, and even, you know, the players of Patri and Mapulion, who, my God, I just have so much respect for, because they held that protest during the World Cup. That is what they were fighting for. And they said, sure, there was a change of locker room here and there, but the changes that we need have not happened, which clearly were the changes of Rubiales getting the hell out of there and Vilda also following him. And another thing that bothers me about those 15 players is, where the hell was FIFA when those players were voicing their concerns? I'm not even going to recall like past events that have shown that FIFA doesn't actually really care about protecting their players. I will bring out another case in this World Cup. Weeks before the World Cup kicked off, former players and employees of Zambian's head coach Bruce Mwape came out and recalled, unfortunately, their experience with him, which included a lot of sexual assault, inappropriate behavior without consent, and FIFA was made aware of that. I mean, it was all over the news. It was mentioned in press conferences where FIFA diverted those questions, but FIFA allowed this man to enter the competition knowing that those were the allegations on him from current players and former players. And what do you know happens? He goes on and assaults a player during camp, which then FIFA's like, oh, actually, let's launch an investigation because maybe that has a little bit of truth of it. Protecting your players isn't just protecting them after the fact and saying you are a victim of assault. No. It has an aspect of prevention from before that fact happens. Why was that investigation not launched before the World Cup kicked off? Why was Mwape even allowed to continue with his duties at a World Cup? Why did FIFA not investigate Rubiales and Vilda and the RFEF, given those players that were voicing their concerns? I mean, they have 15 of them voicing their concerns, and FIFA did not even think about somewhat looking into it. And those are these two brand new cases that have just happened now. And I think FIFA really needs to reconsider what it means to protect your players. You know, you can launch as many anti-bullying social media things. Absolutely go for it. Like, sure, that protects players, but what is the main protection here? We need to be preventing these players from these positions. We need to listen to them from the first concern. We don't have to keep these concerns going until we see that stuff happen on the podium. I mean, that needs to be prevented. And I'm not saying FIFA allowed it, but FIFA could have prevented that. Had Rubiales been investigated or put on a suspension, or even Vilda been removed from his duties, given the concerns of the players, maybe that could have not happened. Maybe that could have been prevented, or at least there was an attempt to prevent. But here there was not a single attempt or an effort to even just look into it. Before you even know it, they go on to the World Cup and you see what the hell happened. It's the same thing with the Zambian players. They did what they needed to do. They voiced their concerns. They were able to contact journalists, publish these news, and let everybody be aware of the situation. But FIFA didn't care. They waited until something happened, until they were like, oh, actually, maybe we should look into it. Why? FIFA has a major duty as the body, the organizing, I mean, the organizers of the event, the body that's supposed to protect these players. They've not only allowed this stuff to happen under their watch at their events, but they haven't even attempted to stop it. And again, I'm not even recalling the dozen and dozens of other concerns and in cases that they've misjudged and completely turned a blind eye to. FIFA has said so many different commitments to, yeah, we want to protect players, and I wonder if there is some kind of friction as to why they don't want to take that step, because I fear if they do take that step and actually show commitment to protecting these players, there's going to be a standard and expectation of any time a concern comes up, they have to act on it. And that is actually the expectation we have of FIFA. But FIFA in some ways don't want people to have that expectation of them, because once they set the standard, they need to meet it. And I wonder if they're worried about their own individuals and their own personnels and officials being investigated after that standard is set. So FIFA need to step up, and FIFA really need to evaluate their values, because this should not be happening at their next event. If there's a concern, they need to step in as that organizing body and actually launch an investigation from the get-go. I mean, even here, it took them 5-6 days to launch something to open. I mean, was it not obvious enough? Was Gianni Infantino not sitting right beside Rubiales? What I've absolutely loved from what has been such a horrific situation is how strong the community of women's football has become. You talk about fans coming together, journalists, media, politicians were even joined into this, men's players, female players. I mean, every single person in the community came to this and supported each other. And historically, the women's game has unfortunately had to always stand up for each other. We saw the She Believes Cup, some really, I mean, huge scenes when Canada were fighting their own federation and currently are still fighting their own federation. But it's because these players know what their teammates and what their opponents are going through. The US players know exactly what it is to be fighting their own federation, which is exactly why they stand by the Canadian players. They could be the biggest rivals on the pitch, but off the pitch, it doesn't even matter for a moment. Alexia Putellas and Beth Mead were opponents when it came to the Ballon d'Or list, but they were also standing up for the same purpose. It's incredible to see the support and the strong individuals that we have in this community. It has not been an easy few days. For me personally, it's been really hard to even wrap my head around the events, and I think it will even take a lot of days to continue to think of, this is exactly the structure of the game, and this is not a surprise. These events are not a surprise, but it's not an abnormal thing that we're seeing. It's actually a symptom of what the system is built on and how it was built. There needs to be structural reforms. That RFEF needs to be torn down head to toe. It is rotten from the core. Rubiales needs to be given a life ban. I mean, I do not want to see that man coaching some youth team over in Russia. Like, he needs to be gone from the game. Vilda needs to follow. UEFA also needs to speak up. And those Spanish players deserve so much better. Again, I cannot even begin to translate my own frustration, let alone how those players feel. It is very unfortunate that this is the episode right after the World Cup wrap-up, but it is a conversation that is very important, and actually this is a conversation that will be a steering wheel of what and how the women's game looks like, because this behavior was never tolerated. I mean, we've never tolerated this, but it's always been allowed because of the power abuse and because of the structure and because the individuals who have been such, and I'm going to say it, scumbags that have allowed this to happen. And the players have been dismissed and ignored and invalidated. And I really, really hope that this is a turning point to all of that. I want to hear your opinions on the situation. Please be very respectful on how you talk about this. And there's not really much else to say. There's no other really closing remarks other than this is a terrible situation that we have found ourselves in, but one that will be game-changing for the game forever. It is also a case that we will be studying for decades and years to come, and not just the women's game, but I feel like in many different dialogues and courses. As always, to stay updated and to continue enjoying the beautiful game, make sure you subscribe to me here on YouTube and follow me on Twitter, and I will see you later.